Imagine waking up one day to find your site stolen by a brutal attack, your business empire being plundered behind the scenes, and the two people you trust most in the world, your husband and your best friend, betraying you behind your back and plotting to destroy everything you've built. How would you react? Would you accept your fate as a blind and betrayed victim, or would you use your newfound darkness to see the truth with a clarity you never had before? This is the story of Madeline Monroe. Get ready for a gripping tale that will challenge your perceptions of vision, trust, and the true meaning of seeing. Stay until the end and be amazed by this breathtaking, twist-filled narrative. The morning sun glinted off the sleek glass facade of the Monroe Industries Tower, a gleaming beacon of success in the heart of Philadelphia's bustling business district. Inside the top-floor executive suite, Madeline Monroe stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, her piercing blue eyes surveying the city sprawled beneath her. At 42, she was the epitome of power and grace, her tailored charcoal suit accentuating a figure that belied her years, and her auburn hair swept into an elegant chignon. "Ms. Monroe, your 9 a.m. is here," her assistant's voice chirped through the intercom. Madeline allowed herself a small smile. "Send them in, Jasmine." As she turned to face the door, Madeline caught her reflection in the polished surface of her desk. The face that looked back at her was one that had graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune, a visage of determination and unshakable confidence. She was Madeline Monroe, CEO of Monroe Industries, the fastest-growing tech company on the East Coast, and she had the world at her feet. The door opened, and a group of nervous-looking executives filed in. Madeline recognized them as representatives from a promising startup she'd been eyeing for acquisition. With a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she gestured for them to take a seat. "Gentlemen, welcome to Monroe Industries. I trust you've had a chance to review our offer." As the meeting progressed, Madeline effortlessly steered the conversation, her sharp mind dissecting their counter-proposals and rebuilding them into something that aligned perfectly with her vision. It was a dance she had perfected over years of boardroom battles and backroom deals, and by the time the executives left 2 hours later, they were practically giddy with the deal they thought they'd won. Jasmine appeared at the door, a knowing look on her face. "Another successful negotiation, Ms. Monroe." Madeline allowed her professional mask to slip for a moment, sharing a conspiratorial wink with her assistant. "Let's just say Monroe Industries will be announcing an exciting new acquisition very soon." As Jasmine left to prepare the necessary paperwork, Madeline's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Patrick, her husband of 15 years. "Dinner at Le Becfin tonight? Have something special planned? Love you." A warm feeling spread through her chest. Patrick, with his boyish charm and brilliant mind, had been her rock through the tumultuous years of building her empire. He understood the demands of her position, never complaining about the late nights or cancelled plans. In many ways, he was the perfect partner for a woman of her ambition. Madeline quickly typed out a response. "Wouldn't miss it for the world. See you at 8. No sooner had she set down her phone than it buzzed again, this time with a call from Amber Thorne, her best friend since college days. "Maddie?" Amber's bubbly voice filled the line. "Tell me you're free for lunch. I have the juiciest gossip about that new art dealer in Rittenhouse Square." Madeline chuckled, already feeling the tension of the morning's negotiations melting away. Amber had that effect on her, a reminder of simpler times before the weight of a multi-billion-dollar company rested on her shoulders. "For you and your gossip, Amber? Always. Park at 1? Perfect. You're a lifesaver, Maddie. See you soon." As she ended the call, Madeline felt a familiar pang of guilt. Between running the company and her commitments to various charitable boards, she'd been neglecting her personal relationships. But that was the price of success, wasn't it? The endless juggling act, trying to keep all the balls in the air without letting any fall. The rest of the morning flew by in a whirlwind of emails, conference calls, and strategy meetings. Before she knew it, it was time to meet Amber for lunch. Park, with its Parisian bistro charm, was a favorite spot for Philadelphia's elite. As Madeline stepped out of her town car, she could feel the eyes of other patrons on her. She was used to the attention, the whispers that followed in her wake. Madeline Monroe, the woman who had it all. Amber was already seated at their usual table, her golden hair catching the sunlight streaming through the windows. As always, she was impeccably dressed in a floral sundress that complemented her vivacious personality. "Maddie," Amber stood to embrace her friend, her smile radiant. God, how do you always look so perfect? It's not fair to the rest of us mere mortals." Madeline laughed, settling into a seat. "Says the woman who looks like she just stepped off a magazine cover. How are you, Amber?" As they fell into easy conversation, Madeline felt some of the ever-present tension in her shoulders begin to ease. This was why she treasured her friendship with Amber. In a world where every interaction felt like a chess match, Amber was a breath of fresh air, uncomplicated and genuine, or so she thought. As Amber regaled her with tales of the Philadelphia social scene, Madeline couldn't help but notice a slight edge to her friend's usually carefree demeanor. It was there in the way Amber's eyes would dart away when discussing Patrick, in the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her wine glass. "Amber," Madeline interrupted gently, "is everything okay? You seem, I don't know, on edge." For a moment, something flashed in Amber's eyes. Fear, guilt. But it was gone so quickly that Madeline wondered if she had imagined it. "Oh, Maddie," Amber laughed, but it sounded forced. "You know me, always getting worked up over nothing. It's just work stress, I suppose. The gallery's been really demanding lately." Madeline nodded, not entirely convinced but unwilling to push further. Everyone was entitled to their secrets after all. Wasn't she living proof of that? As they parted ways after lunch, Madeline couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just Amber. There had been a growing sense of unease gnawing at the edges of her perfect life for weeks now. Little things that didn't quite add up. The way Patrick had been spending more time at the office lately. The odd silences that sometimes fell between them. But she pushed these thoughts aside as her town car pulled up to Monroe Industries. She had an empire to run after all. There was no time for baseless worries. The afternoon passed in a blur of meetings and decisions that would shape the future of her company. By the time Madeline was ready to leave for dinner, the sun was already setting, painting the Philadelphia skyline in hues of orange and pink. As she gathered her things, her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk. It was from her wedding day, she and Patrick beaming at the camera, young and in love. Amber stood beside them, her role as maid of honor cementing the trio's friendship. Madeline traced the outline of their faces with her finger, a wistful smile playing on her lips. "We were so happy then," she murmured to herself. "What changed?" Shaking off the moment of melancholy, Madeline squared her shoulders and headed for the elevator. Whatever doubts or fears might be lurking in the recesses of her mind, tonight was about celebrating her relationship with Patrick. 15 years of marriage was no small feat, especially in their high-pressure world. As her car wound through the streets of Philadelphia, Madeline's mind drifted to the life she had built. From the outside, it was perfect. A successful career, a loving husband, a beautiful home in Rittenhouse Square, and a circle of influential friends. She had achieved everything she had ever dreamed of, and more. So why did she feel this growing sense of unease? Lebec Fiend was as opulent as ever, a bastion of old-world luxury in the heart of the city. As Madeline stepped out of her car, she took a deep breath, centering herself. Whatever was bothering her, she wouldn't let it ruin this evening with Patrick. She spotted him as soon as she entered, his tall frame and salt and pepper hair easy to pick out in the crowded restaurant. As always, the sight of him made her heart skip a beat. Patrick rose to greet her, pressing a tender kiss to her cheek. "You look stunning, darling," he murmured, his green eyes warm with affection. As they settled into their meal, Madeline found herself relaxing, drawn in by Patrick's charm and wit. This was the man she had fallen in love with, the one who could make her laugh even on her worst days. But as the evening wore on, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. There was a tension in Patrick's shoulders, a slight tremor in his hands as he reached for his wine glass. It reminded her of Amber at lunch, and the parallel made her uneasy. "Patrick," she said softly, reaching across the table to take his hand, "is everything all right? You seem distracted." He started, as if caught off guard by her question. For a moment, something like fear flashed in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced by his usual warm smile. "Of course, love, just some work stress, that's all. Nothing for you to worry about." Madeline nodded, not entirely convinced, but unwilling to push further. As they finished their dessert, Patrick excused himself to take a phone call. Madeline watched him go, a frown creasing her brow. Since when did he take work calls during their date nights? As she waited for him to return, Madeline's gaze drifted around the restaurant, and that's when she saw it. A flash of familiar golden hair at a corner table. Amber was here, and she was deep in conversation with a man Madeline didn't recognize. The intensity of their discussion, the way Amber kept glancing nervously towards Madeline's table, set off alarm bells in her head. Before she could process what she was seeing, Patrick returned, looking flustered. "I'm so sorry, darling, but I have to go. There's an emergency at the office that needs my immediate attention." Madeline blinked, surprised. "But it's nearly 10 p.m. What kind of emergency?" I know, Patrick cut her off, already standing and gathering his things. "I'll make it up to you, I promise. Don't wait up for me." And with a quick kiss on her cheek, he was gone, leaving Madeline alone at the table, her mind whirling with questions and suspicions. As she gathered her own things to leave, Madeline cast one last glance towards Amber's table, but her friend was gone, along with the mysterious man she'd been talking to. The ride home was a blur, Madeline's mind racing with possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. As her car pulled up to the elegant townhouse she shared with Patrick in Rittenhouse Square, she felt a chill run down her spine. Something was very wrong in her perfect world, and she was determined to find out what it was. Little did Madeline know, as she stepped out of her car and into the warm Philadelphia night, that her life was about to change forever. In less than 24 hours, everything she thought she knew about her world would be shattered, leaving her to face a darkness she never could have imagined. The stage was set, the players in position, and somewhere in the shadows of the city she loved, a figure waited, a vial of acid in hand, ready to destroy the life of Madeline Monroe. The next morning dawned bright and clear over Philadelphia, the city already bustling with activity. Madeline Monroe, however, was oblivious to the world outside her bedroom window. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind still racing from the events of the previous night. Patrick hadn't come home until the early hours of the morning, slipping into bed beside her with a whispered apology that she pretended not to hear. As she went through her morning routine, Madeline couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted in her world. The reflection that stared back at her from the bathroom mirror looked the same. Immaculate makeup, perfectly coiffed hair, eyes sharp and ready for the day's challenges. But beneath the polished exterior, doubt gnawed at her. "You're being paranoid," she muttered to herself, straightening her blazer one last time before heading downstairs. Patrick was already gone, a hastily scribbled note on the kitchen counter explaining that he had an early meeting. Madeline frowned, her unease growing. Since when did Patrick have meetings before 7 a.m.? Pushing her concerns aside, she focused on the day ahead. She had a crucial board meeting at 10, and she needed to be at the top of her game. As her driver navigated through the morning traffic, Madeline reviewed her notes, mentally preparing for the battles to come. Monroe Industries headquarters loomed before her, a testament to her years of hard work and ambition. As she strode through the lobby, employees scattered in her wake, a mixture of fear and admiration in their eyes. Madeline allowed herself a small smile. This was her element, where she was in complete control. The morning passed in a whirlwind of meetings and decisions. By lunchtime, Madeline had successfully outmaneuvered two board members who had been pushing for a more conservative growth strategy, secured funding for a risky but potentially game-changing research project, and finalized the details of the startup acquisition she had negotiated the day before. As she leaned back in her chair, allowing herself a moment of satisfaction, her phone buzzed with a text from Amber. "Lunch? Need to talk to you about something important." Madeline hesitated, remembering Amber's strange behavior at Lebec Fen the night before, but curiosity won out over caution. "Sure. Park in 30. "Actually," came Amber's swift reply, "can we meet somewhere more private? How about that little cafe near Rittenhouse Square?" The request was odd. Amber usually loved being seen at the trendiest spots in the city, but Madeline agreed, her instincts telling her that whatever Amber wanted to discuss was significant. An hour later, Madeline found herself seated at a secluded table in the back of a quaint cafe, watching Amber fidget nervously with her napkin. Her friend looked pale and drawn, nothing like her usual vivacious self. "Amber, what's going on? You're starting to worry me." Amber took a deep breath, her eyes darting around the cafe as if checking for eavesdroppers. "Maddie, I don't know how to say this. I think Patrick might be involved in something illegal." The words hit Madeline like a physical blow. "What? Amber, that's ridiculous. Patrick would never—" "Just hear me out, please," Amber interrupted, her voice low and urgent. "I overheard something at the gallery yesterday. One of our biggest clients was talking about some sort of financial scheme, and I swear I heard Patrick's name mentioned. Madeline shook her head, denial rising like bile in her throat. You must have misheard. Patrick's not some common criminal, Amber. He's a respected financial advisor. I know how it sounds, Maddie, but think about it. The late nights, the secretive phone calls. Haven't you noticed anything off lately? As much as she wanted to dismiss Amber's words, Madeline couldn't ignore the seed of doubt that had taken root in her mind. Patrick had been acting strange lately, and there were discrepancies in their joint accounts that she had been meaning to ask him about. Even if, and that's a big if, there was something going on. Why are you telling me this in some back alley cafe? Why all the secrecy? Amber leaned forward, her voice dropping even lower. Because I'm scared, Maddie. The man I overheard, he's dangerous. I think he might have connections to organized crime. If he found out I knew anything. The rest of the lunch passed in a blur of whispered theories and half-formed plans. By the time Madeline left the cafe, her world had tilted on its axis. The certainties she had built her life upon suddenly seemed as fragile as a house of cards. As her car wound its way back to Monroe Industries, Madeline's mind raced. She needed proof, one way or the other. If Patrick was innocent, she owed it to him to clear his name. And if he wasn't, well, she'd cross that bridge when she came to it. The afternoon dragged on, Madeline going through the motions of running her company, while her thoughts remained fixated on Patrick and Amber's accusations. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across her office, she made a decision. She would confront Patrick tonight, get to the bottom of this once and for all. At 7 p.m., Madeline gathered her things and headed for the elevator. The office was nearly empty, most employees having left hours ago. As the doors slid open on the ground floor, she stepped out, her heels clicking against the polished marble. And that's when her world exploded in pain and darkness. She never saw her attacker. One moment she was walking towards the exit, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of Patrick, and the next, liquid fire was splashing across her face. The pain was immediate and all-consuming, like nothing she had ever experienced before. Madeline screamed, her hands instinctively flying to her face. She could feel the acid eating away at her skin, burning through to the delicate tissue beneath. The world around her dissolved into chaos, shouting voices, running feet, the shrill wail of an alarm. Someone call 911. Oh my God, is that Ms. Monroe? Don't touch her, that's acid. Through the haze of agony, Madeline was vaguely aware of hands guiding her, voices trying to calm her. But all she could focus on was the burning, the terrible, unrelenting burning, and the terrifying realization that she couldn't see. Her world had become a void of darkness and pain. The next few hours passed in a blur of sirens, urgent voices, and the sharp smell of antiseptic. Madeline drifted in and out of consciousness, the pain medication dulling her senses, but unable to completely mask the agony of her injuries. When she finally regained full awareness, she found herself in a hospital bed, the steady beep of monitors her only companion. The darkness remained, and with it came a wave of panic. "Hello?" she called out, her voice raspy and weak. "Is anyone there?" The sound of hurried footsteps approached, and a gentle hand touched her arm. "Ms. Monroe, you're awake. I'm Dr. Patel, you're in the hospital. Do you remember what happened?" Madeline swallowed hard, fighting back the terror threatening to overwhelm her. There was an attack. Something thrown in my face. Why can't I see?" There was a pause, heavy with unspoken implications. When Dr. Patel spoke again, her voice was soft, laden with sympathy. "Ms. Monroe, I'm so sorry. The acid, it caused severe damage to your eyes. We've done everything we can, but the blindness may be permanent." The words hit Madeline like a physical blow, driving the air from her lungs. Permanent. Blind. The concept swirled in her mind, too enormous, too terrible to fully comprehend. "No," she whispered, shaking her head in denial. "No, that's not possible. I'm Madeline Monroe. I run a multi-billion-dollar company. I can't. Her words dissolved into sobs, the reality of her situation crashing down upon her. Dr. Patel murmured words of comfort, but they washed over Madeline unheard. In that moment, she felt more alone and vulnerable than she ever had in her life. The days that followed were a nightmare of pain, confusion, and despair. Madeline underwent multiple surgeries, endured countless tests, and began the agonizing process of learning to navigate a world she could no longer see. Patrick was a constant presence at her bedside, his voice strained with worry and guilt. "I should have been there," he kept saying, "if I hadn't been working late." Madeline wanted to ask him about Amber's accusations, to demand answers about his strange behavior, but every time she gathered the courage, the words died in her throat. She was too raw, too vulnerable. The truth, whatever it was, would have to wait. Amber, too, was a frequent visitor, her usual bubbly demeanor replaced by a somber attentiveness. She read to Madeline, described the flowers and cards that flooded the room, and swore repeatedly that they would find whoever did this. But as the initial shock began to wear off, Madeline started to notice discrepancies. The way Patrick would tense up when certain topics were broached, the odd pauses in Amber's conversation, as if she was carefully choosing her words, and beneath it all, a current of unspoken tension that hadn't been there before. One afternoon, about a week after the attack, Madeline overheard a hushed conversation outside her hospital room. She recognized Patrick's voice immediately, low and urgent. "We need to be careful," he was saying. "The police are asking questions if they start digging too deep." "Relax," came the reply, a voice Madeline didn't recognize. "Everything's under control. Just stick to the plan." And the conversation cut off abruptly as a nurse entered Madeline's room. But the seed of suspicion that had been planted in her mind began to grow. As the weeks passed and Madeline was finally released from the hospital, she found herself in a world utterly transformed. Her spacious Rittenhouse Square townhouse, once a source of pride, now felt like a labyrinth of unseen obstacles. The simplest tasks, dressing herself, preparing a meal, even walking from room to room, became monumental challenges. Patrick hired a team of caregivers and specialists to help with her recovery, but Madeline bristled at their presence. She was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, who had stared down boardrooms full of men who underestimated her. The idea of relying on others for basic tasks was almost as painful as her injuries, but beneath her frustration and fear, a new determination was taking root. Whoever had done this to her, whatever their motive, they had intended to destroy her. And Madeline Monroe did not go down without a fight. She threw herself into her recovery with the same single-minded focus that had made her a business titan. She worked tirelessly with mobility specialists, learning to navigate with a cane. She mastered Braille with a speed that astounded her tutors, and all the while she listened, gathering every scrap of information she could. Patrick's behavior became increasingly erratic. He was rarely home, always citing work emergencies or meetings that ran late. When he was around, he was distracted and evasive, quick to change the subject whenever Madeline tried to discuss the company or their finances. Amber, too, began to pull away. Her visits became less frequent, her phone calls shorter and more guarded. When she did come by, there was an undercurrent of tension in her voice that Madeline couldn't quite decipher. As Madeline's other senses sharpened to compensate for her lost sight, she became acutely aware of the subtle shifts in tone and breathing that betrayed when someone was lying. And she was hearing those signs more and more often from the two people she had trusted most in the world. 3 months after the attack, Madeline felt ready to take back some control. She arranged a meeting with Monroe Industries' board of directors, insisting on attending in person despite Patrick's protests. The boardroom fell silent as she entered, leaning on her cane but with her head held high. Madeline could feel the weight of their stares, the pity and uncertainty radiating from them in waves. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice steady and strong, "I know there have been concerns about the future of this company in light of recent events. I'm here to assure you that Monroe Industries is not only stable, but poised for growth." She launched into a detailed analysis of the company's position, rattling off figures and projections from memory. As she spoke, she could sense the shift in the room, from pity to surprise, and finally to respect. But it was the conversation she overheard after the meeting that truly set her on a new path. As she waited for Patrick to bring the car around, she heard 2 board members talking in low voices around the corner. "It's impressive what she's done," one was saying, "but can she really run the company like this? And with everything else going on?" "What do you mean?" the other asked. "You haven't heard. There's an SEC investigation brewing. Something about irregular financial transactions. They're keeping it quiet for now, but word is it goes all the way to the top." Madeline's blood ran cold. An SEC investigation? Irregular transactions? The pieces were starting to fall into place, and the picture they formed was ugly indeed. That night, after Patrick had gone to bed, Madeline sat alone in her study, her unseeing eyes fixed on where she knew the window to be. The city stretched out before her, a landscape she could no longer see, but one she was determined to conquer anew. She reached for her phone, her fingers finding the familiar buttons with practiced ease. It was time to call in some favors, to start asking the hard questions she had been avoiding. Madeline Monroe had lost her sight, but she was far from blind. And as she began to dial, she made a silent vow. She would uncover the truth no matter where it led. And when she did, heaven help those who had betrayed her. The game was afoot, and Madeline was playing for keeps. In the darkness that had become her world, a fire was kindling, a fire of determination, of righteous anger, and of an unshakable will to reclaim what was hers. Little did she know the journey ahead would test her in ways she could never have imagined, forcing her to question everything she thought she knew about herself and those closest to her. The acid that had stolen her sight had also burned away the illusions she had lived with for so long. Now in the crucible of her new reality, Madeline Monroe would either be broken or forged into something new, something powerful, something that her enemies would learn to fear. As she ended her first covert phone call, a small, grim smile played across Madeline's lips. The hunt was on, and she was both predator and prey. In the game of shadows that lay ahead, she would need every ounce of her legendary cunning and determination. For in the world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king, and Madeline was determined to be the ruler of this new dark kingdom she found herself in. The rhythmic tapping of Madeline's cane echoed through the sterile hallways of Jefferson Hospital as she made her way to her latest follow-up appointment. 6 months had passed since the acid attack, and while the physical scars were healing, the emotional ones ran deep. Each step was a reminder of how drastically her life had changed, yet also a testament to her indomitable spirit. Dr. Patel's office was a familiar space now, the scent of antiseptic and leather becoming almost comforting in its consistency. As Madeline settled into the chair across from the doctor's desk, she could sense an unusual tension in the air. "Ms. Monroe," Dr. Patel began, her voice carrying a mix of professional detachment and cautious optimism. "I have some news that I think you'll want to hear." Madeline's heart rate quickened, but she kept her voice level. "Go on, doctor." "There's a new experimental treatment being developed at Johns Hopkins. It's still in the early stages, but the preliminary results for cases similar to yours have been promising." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Madeline leaned forward, her unseeing eyes fixed in the direction of Dr. Patel's voice. "Promising how, exactly?" Dr. Patel cleared her throat. "The treatment involves a combination of stem cell therapy and bioengineered corneal implants. In some patients, it's resulted in partial restoration of sight." Madeline's breath caught in her throat. Partial restoration of sight. The words echoed in her mind, igniting a spark of hope she had thought long extinguished. "What are the chances?" she asked, struggling to keep her voice steady. "It's hard to say," Dr. Patel replied cautiously. "The treatment is still experimental, and every case is unique. But given the nature of your injuries and your overall health, I'd say you're an excellent candidate." As Dr. Patel continued to explain the details of the treatment, the risks, the lengthy recovery process, the uncertain outcomes, Madeline's mind raced. This could change everything. But as quickly as the hope had blossomed, a cold, calculating voice in the back of her mind spoke up. If she pursued this treatment openly, she would be vulnerable. Her enemies, whoever they were, would know her plans, could potentially interfere. And there was Patrick to consider. If he was involved in illegal activities as she suspected, the prospect of her regaining her sight might push him to desperate measures. No, Madeline decided. This information was too valuable, too potentially game-changing to share, at least for now. "Dr. Patel," she interrupted, her voice taking on the commanding tone that had served her so well in the boardroom. "I appreciate you sharing this information with me, but I need to ask for your discretion. No one, not my husband, not my friends, not even your staff, can know about this possibility. Can I count on your confidentiality?" There was a pause, and Madeline could almost feel Dr. Patel's questioning gaze. But years of navigating corporate politics had honed her ability to project authority, even without the benefit of eye contact. "Of course, Ms. Monroe," Dr. Patel finally replied. "Doctor-patient confidentiality is absolute. But may I ask why?" Madeline allowed a small, sad smile to cross her face. "Let's just say that my blindness has taught me to be cautious. I need time to consider my options without outside influence. Can you understand that?" "I can," Dr. Patel said softly. "And I'll respect your wishes. But please don't wait too long to make a decision. The sooner we can start the treatment, if that's what you choose, the better your chances of success." As Madeline left the hospital, her mind whirled with possibilities. Hope, that dangerous double-edged emotion, had reawakened in her heart. But with it came a renewed sense of purpose. If there was a chance she could regain her sight, she needed to be prepared. And that meant continuing to adapt, to hone her other senses, to become as formidable in her new dark world as she had been in the light. Over the next few weeks, Madeline threw herself into her adaptation with renewed vigor. She worked tirelessly with her mobility instructor, learning to navigate the busy streets of Philadelphia with increasing confidence. Her sense of hearing sharpened to an almost preternatural degree. She could identify people by their footsteps, sense obstacles by the subtle changes in air currents around her. Her sense of touch became exquisitely sensitive. She learned to read not just Braille, but the micro-expressions on people's faces, feeling the subtle twitches and tensions that betrayed their true emotions. It was a skill that proved invaluable as she began to quietly investigate the web of deceit surrounding her. One evening, as she sat in her home office reviewing quarterly reports, now printed in Braille, she heard Patrick enter the house. His footsteps were uneven, his breathing slightly labored. The scent of expensive scotch wafted into the room as he approached. "Madeline?" he called, his voice carrying a forced cheeriness that set her teeth on edge. "Are you in here, darling?" "In the office, Patrick," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. He entered the room and she could sense him hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Working late again?" he asked, a hint of accusation in his voice. Madeline raised an eyebrow. Someone has to keep the company running. The barb hit home, and she heard Patrick inhale sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing, dear," Madeline said, her voice honey-sweet. "How was your day?" "Another late meeting." The tension in the room was palpable. This dance of half-truths and veiled accusations had become their new normal. The love and trust that had once defined their relationship eroded by suspicion and resentment. "You know how it is," Patrick replied, his words slightly slurred. "The Richardson account is taking up all my time, but it'll be worth it in the end, you'll see." Madeline hummed non-committally, her fingers never pausing in their journey across the Braille report. "I'm sure it will be." She heard Patrick shift his weight, could almost feel the waves of discomfort radiating from him. "Listen, Maddie, I was thinking, maybe it's time we talked about stepping back from the company. You've been through so much, and the stress can't be good for your recovery." The suggestion hung in the air like a noxious gas. Madeline's fingers stilled on the report, her unseeing eyes lifting to fix unerringly on Patrick's face. "Stepping back," she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. "And I suppose you'd be the one to take over." "Well, naturally," Patrick said, a note of false bravado in his voice. "As your husband and a major shareholder, it makes sense for me to—" "No." The word cut through the room like a whip crack. "Monroe Industries is my company, Patrick, my life's work. I built it from nothing, and I'll be damned if I'll hand it over to anyone, even you." The silence that followed was deafening. Madeline could hear Patrick's ragged breathing, could almost taste the mixture of fear and anger rolling off him in waves. "You're being unreasonable, Madeline," he finally said, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "You have to face facts. You're blind. You can't run a company like this." Madeline stood slowly, her hands flat on the desk. When she spoke, her voice was low and intense. "I may have lost my sight, Patrick, but I've never seen more clearly. This company is mine. End of discussion." She heard him open his mouth as if to argue further, then think better of it. With a muttered curse, he turned and stomped out of the office, slamming the door behind him. As the echo of the slamming door faded, Madeline sank back into her chair, her heart racing. The confrontation had been coming for weeks, but now that it had happened, she felt oddly exhilarated. The lines were being drawn, the battle joined, and Madeline Monroe did not intend to lose. The next day brought a visit from Amber. As always, Madeline's erstwhile best friend arrived in a cloud of expensive perfume and forced cheer. "Maddie, darling?" Amber trilled, air kissing Madeline's cheeks. "You look fabulous. How are you feeling?" Madeline plastered on a smile even as her other senses went on high alert. There was something off about Amber's voice, a slight tremor, a hint of nervousness that hadn't been there before. "I'm fine, Amber," she replied, gesturing for her friend to take a seat. "How are things at the gallery?" As Amber launched into a detailed account of her latest exhibition, Madeline listened with half an ear, her focus on the subtle cues her friend was inadvertently giving off, the slight catch in her breath when she mentioned certain clients, the way her voice pitched higher when discussing finances. Something was definitely not right. "And then he said he wanted to buy the entire collection." Amber finished with a laugh that sounded just a touch too bright. "Can you believe it?" "That's wonderful, Amber," Madeline said, leaning forward slightly. "This buyer, it wouldn't happen to be James Holloway, would it?" The sudden silence was all the confirmation Madeline needed. James Holloway was a name she had come across in her covert investigations, a wealthy businessman with rumored ties to organized crime. "How did you know?" Amber asked, her voice small and frightened. Madeline shrugged, keeping her expression neutral. "Just a guess. He's been making waves in the art world lately, hasn't he?" Yes, he has," Amber stammered. "Listen, Maddie, there's something I've been meaning to talk to you about." But before she could continue, the doorbell rang. Madeline heard the housekeeper answer it, followed by the sound of familiar footsteps. "That'll be Patrick," she said, rising from her seat. "Why don't you stay for dinner, Amber? We can catch up properly." As they made their way to the dining room, Madeline's mind was racing. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was still frustratingly incomplete. Dinner was a tense affair, the conversation stilted and artificial. Madeline could sense the undercurrents of fear and guilt emanating from both Patrick and Amber. She played her part, smiling and nodding in all the right places, all the while straining her heightened senses for any slip, any reveal. It came as they were finishing dessert. Patrick's phone buzzed, and he excused himself to take the call. Moments later, Amber's phone chimed with a text message. "Oh, I'm so sorry," Amber said, her voice high and tight. "That's the gallery. There's an emergency with one of the shipments. I have to go." Madeline nodded understandingly, even as suspicion bloomed in her chest. "Of course, dear, don't let us keep you." As Amber hurried out, Madeline made her way to the study under the pretense of retrieving a book, but instead of entering, she pressed herself against the wall next to the partially open door, straining her ears. Patrick's voice drifted out, low and urgent. "Can't keep this up much longer. She's getting suspicious." "We don't have a choice," came the reply. Amber's voice, all pretense of friendliness gone. "If we back out now, Holloway will bury us all." "And what about Madeline?" Patrick hissed. "What if she finds out?" There was a pause, and when Amber spoke again, her voice was cold and determined. "Then we'll have to make sure she doesn't, whatever it takes." Madeline's blood ran cold. The confirmation of her worst fears should have been devastating, but instead, she felt an icy calm settle over her. Now she knew. Now she could fight back. As she listened to Patrick and Amber's footsteps retreating, Madeline's unseeing eyes narrowed with determination. The game had changed, the stakes raised to life and death levels. But Madeline Monroe had never backed down from a challenge, and now, armed with the truth and the possibility of regaining her sight, she was more dangerous than ever. As she made her way back to her room, her mind was already formulating plans, considering angles, preparing for the battle to come. The darkness that had been her prison was now her weapon, her blindness a shield behind which she could prepare her counterattack. They thought her helpless, broken. They were about to learn just how wrong they were. In the quiet of her room, Madeline allowed herself a small, grim smile. The turning point had come, and from this moment on, there would be no mercy for those who had betrayed her. Let them think her blind and powerless. Madeline knew the truth. She had never seen more clearly, and she had never been more ready for war. The pre-dawn hours found Madeline Monroe seated at her desk, her unseeing eyes fixed on the window, where she knew the Philadelphia skyline sprawled beyond. Her fingers danced across her specially modified laptop, the braille display allowing her to sift through information as efficiently as she had with sight. The soft clicks of the keys were the only sound in the otherwise silent house. "Jasmine?" She spoke softly into her headset. "Are you there?" "Yes, Ms. Monroe," came the immediate response. Jasmine, once Madeline's executive assistant, had become her most trusted ally in the weeks since the overheard conversation. I've compiled the financial records you requested. They're troubling, to say the least. Madeline's lips tightened. Walk me through it. As Jasmine detailed the web of shell companies, suspicious wire transfers, and cleverly disguised embezzlement, Madeline felt a cold fury building in her chest. The betrayal ran deeper than she had imagined. Patrick hadn't just been skimming off the top. He'd been systematically looting Monroe Industries for years. And Amber's gallery? Madeline asked, her voice tightly controlled. It appears to be the primary laundering operation, Jasmine confirmed. The inflated art sales, the mysterious overseas buyers, it all tracks back to accounts controlled by James Holloway. Madeline's hands clenched on the edge of her desk. Holloway. The name had become a spectre haunting her investigation, a shadowy figure whose tendrils seemed to reach into every aspect of this conspiracy. Thank you, Jasmine, Madeline said, her mind already racing ahead. I need you to set up a meeting, someone from my past who might be able to shed some light on Holloway's operations. Of course, Ms. Monroe. Who am I contacting? Madeline allowed herself a grim smile. Detective Michael Reeves, we go way back. Tell him Maddie needs a favor. As she ended the call, Madeline leaned back in her chair, allowing the weight of her discoveries to settle over her. The depth of the betrayal was staggering. Patrick, her husband of 15 years, the man she had trusted with her heart and her business. Amber, her best friend since college, the woman who had stood beside her through every triumph and setback, both of them, conspiring not just to steal from her but potentially to silence her permanently. The pain of it was a physical thing, a jagged shard lodged in her chest. But as the initial wave of anguish passed, Madeline felt something else rising to take its place. Determination, rage, a cold, implacable desire for justice. Or was it revenge? She stood, making her way with practiced ease to the window. Pressing her palm against the cool glass, she imagined she could feel the pulse of the city beyond. Her city, the one she had conquered once with her sight, and would conquer again in darkness. You wanted a war, she whispered to the ghosts of her past. You've got one. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of covert meetings, clandestine information gathering and careful planning. Madeline moved through her days with a new purpose, her public face a mask of recovery and resilience, while beneath the surface she plotted and schemed. Her meeting with Detective Reeves proved fruitful. In a dimly lit booth at a nondescript diner, the gruff police veteran had painted a chilling picture of James Holloway's operations. He's smart, Maddie, Reeves had growled, his voice low and urgent. Keeps his hands clean, uses puppets like your husband to do the dirty work. We've been trying to nail him for years, but nothing sticks. Madeline had leaned forward, her unseeing eyes fixed unerringly on Reeves's face. What if I could give you what you need? Evidence, witnesses, a paper trail that even Holloway can't wriggle out of. She had sensed Reeves's surprise, heard the sharp intake of breath. That'd be one hell of a risk, Maddie. Holloway doesn't play nice with people who cross him. A cold smile had played across Madeline's lips. Neither do I, Mike. Not anymore. As she built her case against Holloway, Patrick and Amber, Madeline found herself grappling with a moral quandary she had never anticipated. The desire for revenge burned hot in her veins, urging her to destroy those who had betrayed her, to rain down a justice as blind and merciless as she had become. But another part of her, the part that still clung to the woman she had been before the attack, whispered of mercy, of taking the high road. Late one night, as she sat in her study listening to recordings of Patrick's phone calls, each one a fresh betrayal, a new wound to her already battered heart, the conflict came to a head. You're not a murderer, Madeline, she whispered to herself, her voice choked with unshed tears. You're better than them. You have to be. But even as she spoke the words, another voice, colder and harder, whispered back. Was she better? Or just weaker? Hadn't her adherence to a moral code been what had left her vulnerable in the first place? In that moment, torn between vengeance and virtue, Madeline made a decision. She would have justice, yes, but it would be on her terms. She would destroy the people who had betrayed her, but she would do it legally, publicly. She would drag them into the light and let the world see them for what they truly were. With her course set, Madeline threw herself into her plans with renewed vigor. She worked tirelessly, pushing her body and mind to their limits. Her other senses, already heightened by months of blindness, sharpened even further. She could read the emotional undercurrents in a room with uncanny accuracy, picking up on micro-expressions and subtle shifts in breathing that would have been invisible to her even when she had her sight. It was during this time that she began the experimental treatment Dr. Patel had told her about. The process was grueling, painful injections, hours spent in hyperbaric chambers, endless tests and adjustments. But Madeline endured it all with gritted teeth and unwavering determination. The first sign that the treatment might be working came on a crisp autumn morning. Madeline was in her garden, ostensibly enjoying the last warm days of the year, but in reality listening to a bug she had planted in Patrick's home office. Suddenly, a flash of something, not quite light but a change in the darkness, caught her attention. Her heart racing, Madeline turned her face towards where she knew the sun to be. There in the endless void that had been her world for months was a faint pulsing glow. It was barely perceptible, more a suggestion of light than true vision. But it was there. Tears streamed down Madeline's face as she basked in this first hint of returning sight. But even as joy surged through her, a colder, more calculating part of her mind was already spinning this development into her plans. She wouldn't tell anyone. Not yet. Let them continue to underestimate her, to think her helpless and broken. When the time came, her renewed sight would be just one more weapon in her arsenal. As autumn deepened into winter, Madeline's vision continued to improve incrementally. Shadows became shapes, shapes became blurred outlines. It was nowhere near the crystal-clear vision she had once had, but it was more than she had dared to hope for. All the while, she continued to gather evidence, to lay her traps, to prepare for the moment when she would spring her carefully constructed web around her enemies. She brought in trusted allies, old friends from her college days who owed her favors, up-and-coming lawyers hungry for the case of a lifetime, forensic accountants who could follow the money trail Holloway had so carefully hidden. Through it all, she maintained her public persona of the brave, recovering victim. She attended charity galas on Patrick's arm, smiling and nodding as he played the part of the devoted husband. She had lunches with Amber, listening to her friends' increasingly strained attempts at normalcy. And all the while, she was watching, listening, gathering every scrap of information she could. The final piece of her plan fell into place on a snowy evening in December. Madeline was in her study, reviewing the mountain of evidence she had accumulated, when Jasmine's voice came urgently through her headset. "Ms. Monroe, I think we've got him. One of Holloway's lieutenants just flipped. He's willing to testify." Madeline's breath caught in her throat. This was it, the linchpin she had been waiting for. With an inside witness, the case against Holloway became ironclad. And once Holloway fell, Patrick and Amber would topple with him. "Good work, Jasmine," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through her veins. "Set up a meeting with Reeves. It's time to move." As she ended the call, Madeline stood and made her way to the window. Her improved vision allowed her to make out the blurred lights of the city, each one a pinprick of brightness in the winter darkness. She placed her hand against the cold glass, a smile playing across her lips. The board was set. The pieces were in place. After months of patience, of careful planning and meticulous preparation, it was finally time to make her move. In that moment, standing on the precipice of her grand revenge, Madeline felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced since before the attack. The path ahead was clear, the endgame in sight. She would reclaim what was hers, destroy those who had betrayed her, and emerge from this crucible stronger than ever before. Let them think her blind and helpless for a little while longer. Soon, very soon, they would learn just how badly they had underestimated Madeline Monroe. As she turned from the window, her mind was already racing ahead, fine-tuning the details of her plan. The confrontation that lay ahead would be the performance of a lifetime, a careful dance of revelation and retribution, and Madeline intended to lead every step. First, she would need to set the stage. A dinner party, perhaps? Something intimate yet public enough to have witnesses. She'd invite Patrick and Amber, of course. And Holloway, yes, it was time to finally meet the puppet master face to face. A few key board members, some influential friends, witnesses to her triumph and their downfall. She'd play the gracious hostess, the recovering victim finding her strength again. She'd let them relax, let them think they were safe. And then, piece by piece, she would dismantle their world. The evidence would be presented like courses in a meal. Financial records showing the embezzlement, recordings of incriminating conversations, testimony from turned witnesses, and finally, the pièce de résistance, her own recovered sight, revealed at the perfect moment to drive home just how completely they had failed. As the plan crystallized in her mind, Madeleine felt a fierce joy rising within her. This was what she had been built for. Not just success, but victory against impossible odds. They had tried to break her, to rob her of everything she had built. Instead, they had forged her into something new, something stronger and more formidable than she had ever been before. She moved to her desk, fingers flying over the braille keyboard as she began to set things in motion. Invitations to be sent, preparations to be made. Every detail had to be perfect. As she worked, a quote she had once read floated through her mind. "Before you embark on a journey of revenge, dig 2 graves." The old Madeleine might have heeded that warning, but the woman she had become understood a deeper truth. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice, about righting wrongs and protecting others from the predators who had nearly destroyed her. Let them dig their own graves, she thought with grim satisfaction. She would be too busy rising from the ashes of her old life, reborn and ready to reclaim her place in the world. The stage was set, the actors unknowingly rehearsed, and the audience primed. Soon, very soon, the curtain would rise on Marilyn Monroe's greatest triumph. And when it fell again, nothing would ever be the same. The day of reckoning dawned cold and clear, a crisp January morning that painted Philadelphia in shades of frost and pale sunlight. Marilyn Monroe stood at her bedroom window, her improved vision allowing her to make out the blurred outlines of bare trees and snow-dusted rooftops. She took a deep breath, centering herself for the performance of a lifetime. The past week had been a whirlwind of preparations. Invitations had been sent out for what was ostensibly a celebration of Madeleine's recovery and her return to the helm of Monroe Industries. The guest list was carefully curated. Patrick and Amber, of course, James Holloway, lured by the promise of a major new investment opportunity, key members of the board, and a select group of Philadelphia's elite. Each one a witness, a player in the drama about to unfold. Madeleine's team had been working around the clock. Jasmine had coordinated with Detective Reeves, ensuring that the police would be ready to move at a moment's notice. The evidence, financial records, recorded conversations, sworn testimonies, was prepared and organized, ready to be revealed at the perfect moment. As her hair and makeup team arrived, Madeleine allowed herself to be pampered, using the time to run through her plan one last time. Every word, every gesture had been choreographed for maximum impact. She would be the conductor of this symphony of justice, and by the end of the night the world would know the truth. Hours ticked by, the tension building with each passing moment. As the first guests began to arrive, Madeleine took her position at the top of the grand staircase, a vision in a deep blue gown that hugged her figure and shimmered in the light. She held her white cane loosely, a prop in more ways than one. Patrick appeared at her side, handsome in his tuxedo, the picture of the devoted husband. "Ready, darling?" he asked, his voice carrying a hint of nervousness that only Madeleine's heightened senses could detect. "More than ready," she replied, allowing him to take her arm as they descended the stairs. The grande ballroom of their Rittenhouse Square mansion was ablaze with light and the murmur of conversation. Madeleine moved through the crowd with practiced ease, greeting guests, accepting well wishes, playing the role of the gracious hostess. All the while, her partially restored vision and sharpened senses were cataloguing every detail, every reaction. She felt Amber's approach before she heard her, the scent of her friend's signature perfume heralding her arrival. "Maddie, you look amazing!" Amber gushed, air kissing Madeleine's cheeks. "This party is just fabulous." "Thank you, Amber," Madeleine replied warmly, even as she noted the slight tremor in her friend's voice. "I'm so glad you could make it. We have so much to celebrate, don't we?" As the evening progressed, Madeleine carefully maneuvered her guests, ensuring that key players were in position for what was to come. She felt James Holloway's arrival like a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tension that rippled through the room. "Ms. Monroe," his deep voice rumbled as he approached, "a pleasure to finally meet you in person. Your reputation precedes you." Madeleine turned towards him, her unseeing eyes fixed unerringly on his face. She extended her hand, feeling his firm grip envelop it. "Mr. Holloway, the pleasure is all mine. I've heard so much about you. All good things, I hope," he chuckled, a note of smug confidence in his voice. "Oh, you have no idea," Madeleine replied, her smile sharp as a knife's edge. As dinner was announced, Madeline took her place at the head of the long table, Patrick at her right, Holloway at her left. Amber was seated strategically within earshot, surrounded by board members and influential guests. The stage was set. The first course had barely been served when Madeline cleared her throat, tapping her glass gently with a spoon. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. "Friends, colleagues, honored guests," she began, her voice clear and strong. "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. As you know, the past year has been challenging, to say the least. But I stand before you not as a victim, but as a survivor, a woman who has been through fire and emerged stronger." Murmurs of approval rippled through the room. Madeline paused, allowing the moment to build. "But this evening is about more than just my recovery. It's about truth, about justice, about bringing to light things that have festered in darkness for far too long." She felt the shift in the room, the sudden tension that crackled through the air. Beside her, Patrick stiffened almost imperceptibly. "You see," Madeline continued, her voice taking on a harder edge, "my journey through darkness taught me to see things I had been blind to before. Betrayals, lies, a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of Monroe Industries and beyond." She turned her head, seeming to look directly at Holloway. "Mr. Holloway, would you care to explain to our guests the nature of your business relationship with my husband? Or perhaps you'd prefer to discuss the real purpose of those inflated art purchases from my dear friend Amber's gallery?" The room erupted in shocked whispers. Holloway's chair scraped back as he stood abruptly. "Ms. Monroe, I don't know what you're implying, but—" "Oh, I think you do," Madeline cut him off, her voice like ice. "Jasmine, if you would be so kind as to distribute the files." Jasmine moved swiftly, handing out dossiers to key guests. Madeline could hear the rustle of papers, the sharp intakes of breath as people began to read. "What you have before you," she explained calmly, "is evidence of a years-long embezzlement scheme. Money siphoned from Monroe Industries through a complex web of shell companies and fraudulent art sales, all leading back to one man, James Holloway." The room was in chaos now. Holloway was shouting denials. Board members were demanding explanations. Through it all, Madeline remained a calm center, a small, satisfied smile playing on her lips. She turned to where she knew Patrick was sitting, his breathing rapid and shallow. "Did you really think I wouldn't find out, darling? That I would remain conveniently blind to your betrayal?" Patrick's voice was strangled when he finally spoke. "Madeline, please, I can explain." "Save it for the police, Patrick. They're very interested in hearing your explanation." As if on cue, the doors burst open, and Detective Reeves strode in, flanked by uniformed officers. "James Holloway, Patrick Monroe, Amber Thorne," he called out, his voice cutting through the din. "You're under arrest for fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy." The next few minutes were a blur of activity. Holloway attempted to flee but was quickly subdued. Patrick seemed to collapse in on himself, offering no resistance as he was handcuffed. Amber's sobs echoed through the room as she was led away, mascara streaking down her face. As the dust settled, Madeline stood, commanding the attention of the shell-shocked guests. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disruption to our evening, but I believe in transparency, in facing ugly truths head-on. Monroe Industries will emerge from this stronger, cleaner, ready to move into a new era of ethical business practices." She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep the room. "And one more thing, a final truth that I've been keeping close to my chest." With deliberate slowness, Madeline reached up and removed the dark glasses she had worn all evening. She blinked, her eyes adjusting to the bright lights of the ballroom. For the first time in nearly a year, she looked out at the world with her own eyes, taking in the shocked faces of her guests. "My sight is returning," she announced, her voice ringing with triumph. "Slowly, imperfectly, but returning nonetheless. I stand before you not as a blind victim, but as a woman who has learned to see more clearly than ever before." The room erupted in gasps and exclamations. Madeline allowed the moment to wash over her, savoring the looks of awe and respect on the faces around her. This was her moment of victory, the culmination of months of planning and perseverance. But as the initial euphoria began to fade, a wave of complex emotions washed over Madeline. She watched as Patrick, the man she had loved for so many years, was led away in handcuffs. Despite everything, a part of her heart ached at the sight. Amber's tear-stained face flashed before her eyes, a reminder of a friendship that had once meant everything to her. The betrayal still stung, but mixed with it now was a sense of profound sadness for what had been lost. Even as she accepted congratulations and fielded questions from awestruck guests, Madeleine felt a hollow ache forming in the pit of her stomach. She had won, yes. Justice had been served, but at what cost? As the last of the guests departed and the police finished gathering evidence, Madeleine found herself alone in the grand ballroom. The silence was deafening after the chaos of the evening. She moved to the window, looking out at the city lights with her newly recovered vision. The Philadelphia skyline sparkled before her, a vista she had thought lost to her forever. It was beautiful, achingly so, but it was also a stark reminder of how much had changed, how much she had lost and gained in the crucible of the past year. Madeleine pressed her forehead against the cool glass, closing her eyes against the sudden sting of tears. She had done what was necessary, had fought for justice, and won. But the victory felt pyrrhic, tainted by the destruction of relationships that had once been the bedrock of her life. In the quiet of the empty room, Madeleine allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She wept for the woman she had been, for the trust she had lost, for the friendships and love that had been irreparably shattered. She wept for Patrick, for Amber, for the lives that would be destroyed in the wake of tonight's revelations. But as the storm of emotion passed, Madeleine felt a new resolve settling over her. She had been forged in fire, tempered by betrayal and hardship. The path ahead would not be easy, but she would walk it with her head held high, her eyes open to both the beauty and the darkness of the world. She turned from the window, surveying the empty ballroom. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Rebuilding Monroe Industries, restoring public trust, charting a new course for her life. It would be challenging, perhaps the greatest challenge she had ever faced, but Madeleine Monroe had never shied away from a challenge. She had stared into the abyss of darkness and despair, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, more determined than ever. As she made her way upstairs to her bedroom, Madeleine's mind was already racing with plans for the future. The story of tonight would be all over the news by morning. She would need to hold a press conference, to reassure investors, to begin the process of cleaning house at Monroe Industries. But those were concerns for tomorrow. For now, Madeleine allowed herself to feel the full weight of her victory, bittersweet though it might be. She had taken on Goliath and won. She had faced her demons and emerged victorious. As she prepared for bed, catching glimpses of herself in the mirror, her eyes clear and focused for the first time in nearly a year, Madeleine made a silent vow. She would use this second chance, this rebirth, to make a difference. To be not just successful but truly great. To build something lasting and meaningful from the ashes of her old life. The road ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and potential pitfalls. But Madeleine Monroe was ready. She had walked through fire and emerged tempered, stronger than ever before. Whatever the future held, she would face it with open eyes and an unbreakable spirit. As she drifted off to sleep, the last thought that flitted through Madeleine's mind was not of revenge or triumph, but of possibility. Tomorrow was a new day, the first day of the rest of her life, and she intended to make every moment count. The days following the dramatic dinner party unfolded in a whirlwind of activity. Philadelphia was abuzz with the scandal, Madeleine Monroe's name on everyone's lips. News outlets clamored for interviews, investors demanded answers, and the legal system ground into motion, preparing for what promised to be one of the most high-profile trials in the city's recent history. Madeleine woke early the morning after, her partially restored vision allowing her to make out the soft glow of dawn creeping through her bedroom windows. For a moment she lay still, allowing the events of the previous night to wash over her. The triumph, the vindication, the bittersweet ache of lost relationships. It all swirled together in a complex emotional cocktail. But Madeleine Monroe had never been one to wallow. With a deep breath, she pushed herself up, ready to face the new reality she had created. There was work to be done. Her first order of business was a press conference, hastily arranged in the lobby of Monroe Industries headquarters. As Madeleine stepped up to the podium, she could feel the energy in the room, a mixture of anticipation, skepticism, and undisguised curiosity. Camera flashes popped like lightning, and a forest of microphones stretched towards her. "Good morning," she began, her voice steady and clear. "I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Monroe Industries, but as a woman who has been through a crucible of betrayal and emerged stronger for it. Last night, a conspiracy that threatened the very foundation of this company was exposed and dismantled. She paused, allowing her gaze to sweep across the assembled reporters. Her improving vision allowed her to make out their eager expressions, their pens poised above notepads. I want to assure our employees, our shareholders, and the public that Monroe Industries remains strong. The actions of a few corrupt individuals do not define us. Moving forward, we are committed to complete transparency and the highest ethical standards. The questions came fast and furious after that. Madeline fielded them with the skill of a seasoned politician, neither avoiding difficult topics nor allowing herself to be drawn into speculation about the ongoing legal proceedings. Ms. Monroe, how do you respond to allegations that you orchestrated this as a power play? Madeline's lips curved in a wry smile. I orchestrated nothing but the exposure of the truth. The evidence speaks for itself, and I have full confidence that the legal system will see justice done. What about your relationship with Patrick Monroe and Amber Thorne? How could you not have known what was happening? This question stung, hitting close to the doubts that still plagued her in quiet moments. But Madeline's voice remained steady as she replied, Trust is a powerful thing, and it can also be a blinder. I trusted people who betrayed that trust. It's a painful lesson, but one that has ultimately made me and this company stronger. As the weeks passed, Madeline threw herself into the work of rebuilding Monroe Industries. The company's stock had taken a hit in the immediate aftermath of the scandal, but Madeline's swift action and transparent approach began to restore investor confidence. She instituted a series of reforms, bringing in external auditors to go through the company's books with a fine-tooth comb. Any employee found to have been complicit in the embezzlement scheme was immediately terminated. Madeline made it clear that there would be zero tolerance for unethical behavior moving forward. The legal proceedings against Patrick, Amber, and James Holloway moved forward at what felt like a glacial pace. Madeline found herself spending long hours with lawyers and prosecutors, going over evidence and preparing for trial. Seeing Patrick and Amber in court for the first time since the night of the dinner party was a shock to Madeline's system. Patrick looked haggard, his once charming smile replaced by a grim, haunted expression. Amber's golden hair had lost its luster, her designer outfits replaced by somber, conservative attire. As Madeline took the stand to testify, she felt a complex swirl of emotions. Anger at their betrayal warred with lingering affection and a deep sadness for what had been lost. But as she recounted the events leading up to that fateful night, her voice remained steady, her resolve unshakable. Mr. Monroe, the prosecutor asked, when did you first become suspicious of your husband's activities? Madeline's gaze flicked to Patrick, seeing the mixture of shame and defiance in his eyes. It was a gradual process, she replied. Little inconsistencies at first, things that didn't quite add up. But it wasn't until after the acid attack, when I was forced to rely on my other senses, that I truly began to piece things together. The trial dragged on for months, a media circus that kept Philadelphia enthralled. Madeline did her best to stay above the fray, focusing on running her company and continuing her vision therapy. But there were nights when the weight of it all threatened to crush her, when the loneliness of her empty house felt like a physical presence. It was during one of these low moments that Madeline received an unexpected visitor. She was working late in her home office when Jasmine announced that Detective Reeves was at the door. "Send him in," Madeline said, curious about this unscheduled visit. Reeves entered, his bulk filling the doorway. "Evening, Maddie," he said, his gruff voice tinged with an unfamiliar note of concern. "Thought I'd stop by, see how you're holding up." Madeline gestured for him to take a seat. "I'm fine, Mike. Just busy with the usual corporate fires." Reeves settled into the chair across from her, his keen eyes taking in the late hour, the stack of papers on her desk, the faint shadows under her eyes. "Uh-huh," he said, unconvinced. "And how are you really doing?" Something in his tone, the genuine concern from this man who had seen her at her lowest, broke through Madeline's carefully constructed walls. To her horror, she felt tears welling up in her eyes. "It's hard," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won. I know I won. But some days it feels like I lost everything." Reeves leaned forward, his voice gentle. "You've been through hell, Maddie. It's okay to not be okay sometimes. But don't let those bastards take anything more from you. You're stronger than that." His words, gruff but sincere, were like a balm to Madeline's battered spirit. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to truly open up, to voice the doubts and fears that had been plaguing her. As the night wore on, Madeline found herself laughing at Reeves's dry humor, swapping war stories, and feeling more like herself than she had in a long time. When he finally left in the early hours of the morning, Madeline felt as though a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. That conversation marked a turning point for Madeline. She began to realize that in her single-minded focus on justice and rebuilding her company, she had neglected her own emotional healing. With characteristic determination, she set about rectifying that oversight. She started seeing a therapist, working through the complex tangle of emotions left in the wake of the betrayal and the acid attack. She reconnected with old friends who had nothing to do with the business world, rediscovering parts of herself that had been buried under years of corporate ambition. As spring blossomed in Philadelphia, bringing new life to the city, Madeline felt a corresponding renewal in her own spirit. Her vision continued to improve, the world coming into ever sharper focus. But more than that, she felt as though she was seeing clearly in a deeper, more profound way. The verdict, when it finally came, was almost anticlimactic. Patrick, Amber, and Holloway were all found guilty on multiple counts. As the judge read out the sentences, years in prison, hefty fines, restitution to be paid, Madeline felt a complex mixture of vindication and sorrow. Outside the courthouse, facing a phalanx of reporters, Madeline made a brief statement. "Justice has been served today," she said, her voice carrying clearly over the buzz of questions. "But there are no true winners in a case like this. My hope now is that we can all begin the process of healing and moving forward." As she turned to leave, a reporter called out, "Ms. Monroe, do you have any message for your ex-husband or Ms. Thorne?" Madeline paused, considering. Finally, she turned back to the cameras. "I do," she said softly. "I hope they find a way to make amends, not just to me or to Monroe Industries, but to themselves. Redemption is always possible if you're brave enough to pursue it." With that, she strode away, head held high, leaving a buzz of conversation in her wake. In the months that followed, Madeline continued to guide Monroe Industries to new heights. The scandal, rather than destroying the company, had ultimately made it stronger. Under Madeline's leadership, it became known as a bastion of corporate transparency and ethical business practices. But even as she achieved new levels of professional success, Madeline found herself re-evaluating her priorities. The ordeal had taught her the value of balance, of nurturing personal relationships alongside professional ambitions. She became involved in advocacy work for victims of assault and corporate fraud, using her story to inspire and empower others. She established a foundation to fund research into ocular regeneration, determined to help others who had suffered similar injuries. 1 year to the day after the fateful dinner party, Madeline stood once again at the window of her Rittenhouse Square home. The city stretched out before her, familiar yet somehow new. Her vision, while not perfect, had improved to the point where she could make out individual buildings, the flow of traffic, the play of light on the Schuylkill River. As she gazed out at the city she had conquered twice now, Madeline reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain, the betrayal, the long nights of doubt and fear, they had all left their mark. But they had also forged her into something stronger, something more resilient. She thought of Patrick and Amber serving their sentences. Despite everything, she found she could wish them well, hope that they would find a way to redeem themselves. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a step towards peace. Her phone buzzed, a text from Jasmine reminding her of a charity gala that evening. Madeline smiled, looking forward to the event not as a business obligation, but as a chance to connect with people, to make a difference. As she turned from the window to prepare for the evening, Madeline caught sight of herself in the mirror. The woman who looked back at her was not the same one who had stood in this spot a year ago. This Madeline was older, yes, with a few more lines around her eyes, but those eyes were clear and bright, filled with a hard-won wisdom and an unshakable strength. She had walked through fire, had faced the darkness both literal and metaphorical, and she had emerged not unscathed but unbroken. More than that, she had emerged with a new purpose, a deeper understanding of herself and the world around her. The journey wasn't over, Madeline knew. There would be more challenges ahead, more moments of doubt and difficulty, but for the first time in a long time, she felt truly ready to face whatever life might throw at her. As she applied her makeup, a small smile played around Madeline's lips, The future stretched out before her, full of possibility, and Madeline Monroe was ready to meet it head-on, with open eyes and an open heart. She had lost much, yes, but she had also gained immeasurably. In the crucible of betrayal and pain, she had found her true self, and that, Madeline realized, was the greatest victory of all. As she left her home that evening, stepping out into the vibrant energy of Philadelphia, Madeline felt a surge of excitement for what lay ahead. The story of Madeline Monroe was far from over. In fact, she suspected the most exciting chapters were yet to be written. With a spring in her step and a gleam in her eye, Madeline set out to face her future, ready to write the next chapter of her remarkable life. The woman who had once been blind, but now could see, was poised to show the world just how brightly she could shine. 5 years had passed since the night that changed everything. Philadelphia's skyline had evolved, new towers reaching towards the heavens, but the view from Madeline Monroe's office remained as breathtaking as ever. She stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows, her gaze sweeping over the city she had once conquered, lost and reclaimed. At 47, Madeline cut an impressive figure. Her auburn hair, now streaked with elegant strands of silver, was swept into a sleek chignon. The lines around her eyes spoke of both laughter and hardship, a roadmap of a life lived fully. Her slate-gray suit was impeccably tailored, projecting an aura of power and confidence. But it was her eyes that had changed the most. Once sharp with ambition, and later clouded by betrayal, they now held a depth of wisdom and compassion that could only be earned through adversity. "Ms. Monroe?" Jasmine's voice came through the intercom. "Your 2 o'clock is here." Madeline smiled, turning from the window. "Send them in, please." The door opened, admitting a group of young entrepreneurs, their faces a mix of nervousness and excitement. Madeline had started a mentorship program, dedicating time each week to guide the next generation of business leaders. "Welcome," she said warmly, gesturing for them to take seats around the conference table. "Before we dive into your proposals, I want to share something with you." She moved to the head of the table, her gaze sweeping over the eager faces before her. Success in business isn't just about profits or market share. It's about integrity, resilience, and the courage to face hard truths, especially about yourself. As she spoke, Madeline reflected on her own journey. The acid attack that had nearly destroyed her had instead become the catalyst for profound change. Her vision, while not perfect, had stabilized at a level that allowed her to function without assistance, but the real transformation had been internal. The betrayal by Patrick and Amber had shattered her world, but from those fragments, she had built something stronger, more authentic. Monroe Industries had not only recovered from the scandal, but had thrived, becoming a beacon of ethical business practices. Madeline had diversified her interests, pouring resources into medical research, particularly in the field of ocular regeneration. The foundation she had established was making real strides, offering hope to those who, like her, had faced the darkness. "Your greatest challenges," she continued, addressing the rapt entrepreneurs, "will often be your greatest teachers. It's not about avoiding failure or betrayal. It's about how you rise from them." Her words carried the weight of hard-won experience. The legal aftermath of the scandal had been grueling, but Madeline had faced it with unwavering determination. She had testified at multiple trials, her composure under cross-examination earning grudging respect even from opposing counsel. Patrick and Amber had both served their sentences and been released. Madeline had grappled with complex emotions when she heard the news, but ultimately she had found a measure of peace. She had even, in a move that surprised many, offered support for their rehabilitation programs. "Truth," Madeline said, her voice soft but intense, "is both a sword and a shield. It can cut deep, exposing painful realities, but it also protects, providing a foundation of authenticity that no storm can shake." She thought of the many nights she had spent soul-searching, confronting hard truths about herself. The ambition that had driven her to success had also blinded her to the corruption growing in her own home. It had been a bitter lesson, but one that had ultimately led to profound self-discovery. Madeline had learned to balance her drive for success with a deeper appreciation for personal relationships and self-care. She had rediscovered old passions, painting, playing the piano, finding in them a solace and joy she had forgotten existed. "Resilience isn't about being unbreakable," she told her audience, her voice carrying the warmth of hard-earned wisdom. "It's about learning to bend without breaking, to find strength in your vulnerabilities." Her own resilience had been tested time and again. There had been setbacks in her recovery, days when the darkness threatened to overwhelm her. But each time, she had found the strength to push forward, to redefine her limitations. Madeline had become an advocate for corporate transparency and ethical leadership. Her speeches on the subject packed auditoriums, her personal story lending weight to her words. She had written a memoir not as a tell-all exposé, but as a roadmap for others facing their own crucibles. "Remember," she said, leaning forward slightly, her gaze intense, "that your true strength lies not in never falling, but in rising every time you fall." As the meeting concluded and the young entrepreneurs filed out, energized and inspired, Madeline returned to the window. The afternoon sun gilded the Philadelphia skyline, casting long shadows and bathing the city in a warm glow. She thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. The pain, the betrayal, the long nights of doubt, they were all part of her story now, but they no longer defined her. Instead, they had become the forge in which she had remade herself, stronger and more compassionate than she had ever been before. Madeline's phone buzzed with a reminder. In an hour, she was due at the hospital to visit the pediatric ward. It was something she did regularly, reading to the children, offering comfort and hope to those facing their own battles with darkness. As she gathered her things to leave, Madeline caught sight of her reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at her was a far cry from the hard-driving CEO of years past. This Madeline carried herself with a quiet confidence, a sense of purpose that went beyond balance sheets and profit margins. She had learned that true vision went far beyond mere sight. It was about seeing the potential for growth in every challenge, the opportunity for compassion in every interaction, the chance for redemption in every fall. Madeline Monroe stepped out of her office, ready to embrace the next chapter of her life. As the elevator descended, carrying her towards new adventures and opportunities to make a difference, she smiled to herself. The darkness had tried to claim her, but she had emerged into the light, stronger and more radiant than ever. And in that light she would continue to grow, to learn, and to illuminate the path for others. As she stepped out onto the bustling Philadelphia street, Madeline lifted her face to the warm sun. The future stretched out before her, full of promise and possibility, and she was ready, with open eyes and an open heart, to meet whatever it might bring. For Madeline Monroe, this was not an ending, but a glorious new beginning, and she couldn't wait to see what lay ahead. If this narrative resonated with your soul, don't miss out on other captivating stories we have to share. Subscribe to our channel, turn on notifications, and join us as we explore content that could bring new meaning to your journey. Don't wait. The next video is already waiting for you. Click and continue this journey with us. See you there.